T-minus 50 seconds. T-minus 40 seconds. T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
So good morning. Welcome to day 2 of TechFest. And specifically this morning, we're talking about cybersecurity. So welcome from the VE studios here in North Point. And this event also supported by IT Cork SkillNet. So very happy to kick off today's session. And obviously cybersecurity is an ever evolving landscape, specifically post COVID-19, even more so. And we're going to hear from thought leaders in the cybersecurity space this morning, kicked off by our own Rick Ferguson from Trend Micro. And then we're going to go into a panel discussion on various topics around cybersecurity, which I hope will address everyone's concerns from different angles around the landscape today and how you can look at different ways to evolve your cybersecurity strategy, but also maybe some practical tips as well, which you can take away from the session. I'm very interested to this afternoon session as well, where we're going to have a workshop and cover a little different angle more from a technical perspective. So if any of you techies out there that are interested, please stay tuned for the afternoon session as well. So let's kick it off on day 2, and let's kick in with the cybersecurity workshop, and I'll hand over to Rick Ferguson now. Over to you, Rick.
Fantastic. Thanks, Willie. And thank you all of you for joining us. This morning's session at IT Cork's TechFest. My name's Rick Ferguson, and I'm the Vice President of Security Research at Trend Micro. It's funny, I was thinking about questions to ask the panel, and literally just before we went live, I'm thinking of extra things to throw in later on. And I'm thinking, we need to ask about, how do you feel professional life has changed post COVID-19? And then I thought about the situation that I'm in this morning. I'm sitting here in Warsaw in Poland, broadcasting to you live, something that I would usually do on a stage. I'm wearing glasses, which I'm too vain to wear usually, but my screen is so small, I've got no choice. I've got no idea what I'd be talking about otherwise. I can hear my daughter having breakfast in the kitchen, and I know at some point quite soon they're going to walk past on their way to the nursery. And I'm sure many of you are now working in very similar situations. So it almost seems redundant sometimes to ask how much life has changed, but I think we'll dig into it a lot in the panel later on, that there is a lot architecture-wise, strategy-wise, infrastructure-wise that has changed and needs to continue to change. And we'll dig into that kind of stuff later on. First of all, I'd like to thank IT Cork's SkillNet for supporting the event. SkillNet is a learning network that works with companies of all sizes in the tech sector in the Southwest region and addresses current and future skills needs through subsidized training and development solutions. So, if you feel that you could benefit from their services, go look them up. And again, thank you very much for sponsoring the event. I would reiterate what you heard briefly from Willie there. There are 2 masterclasses after this event in the afternoon from colleagues of mine, actually, Carl and Ian, Security 101 and Insight into the Hacker, and how to hunt threats rather than reacting to security events. Both of those will be happening later on, and I would encourage you to stick around and participate in those there. But those colleagues of mine are both experts in their field and well worth the investment of your time. So on to the content for today, for my initial keynote. I was tempted, when I was asked to do this, I was tempted to create a presentation that spoke about the kinds of ways that we've seen cyber criminals leveraging COVID-19 as a lure, and how we've seen tactics change. But then I thought, if we're really honest about it, that's quite a nice way to get clicks on stories and maybe get journalists' interest in some research by framing it in the COVID-19 frame. But although it might feel like an eternity, and it certainly affected us all in different ways, the world since March has changed. The pandemic will go away, but so I think it's less important to focus on the disease, the illness itself, and the way criminals use that, because criminals use any newsworthy event to get people to click on their links or download their files or surrender their credentials, or whatever the scheme may be. It happened with the death of Michael Jackson. It happens with earthquakes and hurricanes, and it happened with COVID-19. That really should come as no surprise to anyone. So what I decided instead to focus on, given the title of the the session, Designing for a New Era of Threats and Complexity, I wanted to dig in a little to why it's a new era of complexity and why it's a new era of threats, and what's the motivation for the threat actors, and what can we do looking forward. So maybe not what can you do right now and which products should you buy. If you've seen me presenting before, you know that's not my style. But looking forwards to technologies that we should focus on rather than threat tactics that actually should come as no surprise to anyone. Now, I have been told, this is another fantastic change in the era of remote presentations and virtual events. I have been told that we'll be running polls throughout this event, but I'm not in control of these polls. They could appear at any time. I'll be just as surprised as you. Look, see, here's the first one. So here's an interactive poll. If you wouldn't mind giving us your input, it's very valued. It's on my screen over here. That's why I keep looking that way. What type of organization do you feel is most targeted by cyber criminals? So we'd love to get your input on this poll question. I can see red text at the bottom that says I'm not allowed to vote. So my hands are here, look, I'm not voting. I've just exposed my fingerprints to everyone. Can you believe I'm so stupid? And then, are we going to see the results live? We are. Equal distribution, that's interesting. So even the people that chose one or the other have virtually an equal distribution, and the rest of you plumb for both anyway. And I think you're right. I didn't even know what this question was going to be. I think you're absolutely right. They're targeted perhaps in different ways. They're targeted perhaps using different tools, and in some cases for different purposes, but they're equally targeted. So bearing that in mind, let's let me go on to screen sharing over here and get the presentation up, and we'll dive straight into that. I must warn you, one of my failings, one of my character failings, professional failings, is timekeeping. You may already have noticed that. I've already been speaking for far longer than I thought I would during this introduction. I'm going to do my best to be on time, but I do have a lot of content to share with you. So let's get straight into that. Like I said, I didn't want to do a standard cybercrime presentation. So I want to look more at the motivations behind it, and then the way that the cybercrime functions underneath, the problems that face us as security professionals, and the kind of areas we could look into for investment and investigation ongoing. So I'm sure you've heard the expression, there's no such thing as a free lunch. It actually, it has its roots way back in history. There's a French expression, donnant, donnant, which dates back to early 1800s, which effectively means you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, English expression. The phrase "there's no such thing as a free lunch" actually originated with the temperance movement when they were protesting the free lunches. You can see an advertisement here from an old, I think it's 1913 US newspaper. And what saloon owners used to do is offer a free lunch to anyone that came in to buy a drink. And obviously they'd make sure the free lunch was nice and salty so that you'd carry on buying far more drinks. So there really was no such thing as a free lunch. It was just there to get you to spend more money on drinks, which is where all the profit was. I've worked in my fair share of bars, and the profit is still in wet sales, not in food sales. So there is no such thing as a free lunch. And it was actually the pithy observation of a cynical dig reader back in 2010 who said, if you're not paying for it, then you are the product. So that phrase that we feel has been around forever actually originated with some cynical dig user back in 2010. But I think we all seem to innately realize that altruism in commerce is less common than the proverbial rocking horse-based fertilizer. So there is no such thing as a free lunch. And with that in mind, obviously, as the internet grew and gathered pace, and we became more globally interconnected, data has become the new oil. It's a hackneyed phrase, but it's hackneyed for a reason. It's very true. It's a valuable resource. It's considerably more simple to extract and to mine, and infinitely more versatile than oil. And this commercial online economy is an extremely competitive one. It's enumerated in user populations, in dwell time, click-throughs, impressions. All of the information interactions and enticements that are on offer are there not only for your elucidation and entertainment, but they're there to persuade you to part with the maximum amount of information possible over the time that you spend on that website, whether intentionally or otherwise. And all of that information is further reused to refine targeting of information, targeting of services, to get you to come back as a repeat customer, to get you to buy more. And unlike oil, it's not burned up when it's used. Arguably, it becomes more valuable because the use of data generates data in itself. Did my repurposing of this data work? What was the outcome? How did people react? How can I then further refine? So it's resold, reused, and remined. And there are now hundreds of data brokers out there monetizing your data, my data, in a perfectly legal and legitimate way in this online data economy. Give you one example. There's an organization, I was delving through this, not shady, but unilluminated, let's say, world of data brokers. And I found one of the biggest is a company I'd never heard of called Axiom, ACXIOM. And they offer data as a service to their customers. They offer 11,000 different data attributes and scores relating to over 2.6 billion people in 62 countries. So that's the scale of the data lake about us, our habits, our interactions, and our actions that they have to offer. So what kind of data are we talking about? And the reason why we're talking about data will become clear. Data is the basis for everything. We're talking about the legitimate economy here. And in this legitimate economy, there are effectively three types of data. There is volunteered data, which is data that we willingly part with, whether that's surveys, social media profiles and posts, those crazy games, and what kind of ice cream are you that you probably see your friends interacting with and sharing on social networks. They're all there to entice you to voluntarily part with as much data about yourself as possible. It's not just innocent fun. It's about harvesting a collection of data. And there are news stories that have told us that time and time again, how this data is collected and then sometimes misused. But that's not the full extent of data that's out there. There's also observed data, which is not something that you necessarily willingly share, but it's still something which is externally visible about your action. So that could be GPS data, it could be telecoms metadata, for example. There have been plenty of news stories relating to that. And it allows you to build up more of the detailed picture. Who called who, at what time, how long did they speak for, where did they go? You could probably go on to, and this is the third data type, infer other kinds of information based on that volunteered and observed data. So this inferred data kind of completes the picture about us as individuals by mining and recombining those first two categories. There was actually a fantastic experiment carried out by a German journalist who asked Deutsche Telekom, I think it was Deutsche Telekom, for all of his telecoms data going back 6 months. Eventually, they complied and gave him that data. And then he gave it to Die Zeit, a German newspaper, who built a fantastic interactive widget, which is still available on the Die Zeit website, which paints an eerily accurate picture of this guy's life, just from social media posts and telecoms data. Now, if you think, obviously, there's the information which is clearly out there, name, address history, email accounts, but if you begin to add in social security identifiers, race, ethnicity, political affiliation, maybe picked up from social media, the picture begins to get fuller, and then you add color with details about your home and the neighborhood that you live in, all freely available open source intelligence, how much your house is worth, how often you relocate, who holds your mortgage, how much it's worth. And all of this is either volunteered or observed. And then think of the inference that can be drawn from that massive data lake, building an eerily accurate picture of all of us. So that's the world of real business, if you like. But let's not forget that data is also a criminal commodity. And this is our area of focus today when it comes to talking about the world of cybercrime. Data is really the tool which is used to drive the motivation behind the vast amount of cybercrime. Obviously, the motivation at the end of the day is financial. How do I create a criminal income from these incursions into other people's lives, computers, enterprises, networks, whatever it may be. So data is huge as a means to an end in the criminal world. It's equally valued, it's stolen, it's bought, it's sold, it's harvested and mined in very similar ways. Criminals have always learned huge lessons from the world of legitimate business. And it's used to create more credible attack vehicles to better identify and target individuals, groups, high net worth individuals, or companies and organizations. And with the explosion of data from connected devices too, that we'll go into later, these kinds of attacks will only increase. And much of this data falls into, of course, a fourth category. It's not volunteered, it's not observed, it's not inferred, it's simply stolen. And there's such a glut of it that I think the prices of some of it will surprise you, given that the income that can be generated from this kind of data. Fraudulent loan applications back in 2016, for example, not all of them driven by cybercrime, but a vast amount of them fed by this data we're talking about, were totaled up to about $16 billion in 2016. And that's just fraudulent loan applications. Of course, then there's business email compromise, ransomware, credit card theft, identity theft, and resale of all that. So the economy is huge. The last estimate I saw for the annual turnover of the cybercrime economy was $1.5 trillion annually. So it's a criminal commodity, and it's driving an industry which is global in scope, massively distributed in nature, and extremely secretive. And that's what's arrayed against you. It's personal, of course, the attacks that we see. What you're looking at here is, these are all very recent advertisements from Underground Criminal Forum of various types. This one that you're seeing right now is an advertisement for a banking Trojan, stealing the kinds of information you would expect to see. So on there, you've got the user's real IP address to overcome some online security checks, so geolocation, for example, username, machine name, information about the PC and operating system, network information. It will go on to steal logons for any banking sites that you may visit. What else does it say? Crypto wallet login details, PayPal, and any other authenticated website. All of your cookies, all of your autofill data, and any credit card data, and all of that is regularly sent back to the attacker using SMTP for this particular threat. So that's the kind of standard banking Trojan that you'll see advertised in these kinds of online forums. But it doesn't stop there. You can see the values and prices of stolen credit card information and bank account information here. I'm not sure if you'll be surprised, but it's individually of very low value. That's an indicator of how much data is out there for sale. It's not just financial and banking, also you're talking about identities and real documents, scans of stolen ID cards, driving licenses, copies of ID cards, physical real world copies of, and of course, digital, all of the data contained therein. So it's highly personal. We're talking about access to farmed identities, stolen identities, identities with full address history, and the prices are incredibly low. And it doesn't end there. Now it's definitely moving into the world of IoT. So you're seeing here a post on a legit forum, not an underground forum, from someone complaining that their Fitbit email was changed without their consent. And that's because criminals are interested in that too. Stolen accounts and the data that they contain for things like your Fitbit or other connected devices is also being traded online. And one of the more that security evolves, the more that threat actors evolve their techniques and attacks. So this is a SIM swapping service advertised in Australia for taking control of other people's SIMs to overcome two-factor authentication on their accounts. So criminals are active, innovating, and stealing in huge quantities for this resale. But of course, it's not just personal, it's commercial too. This is an advertisement of somebody selling access to an online store with a pretty reasonable turnover for the user to do whatever they want with. Access as a service is becoming a big deal in cybercrime circles right now. Not just access, but also logs. So this person has been harvesting logs from cloud services and are then selling access to the bulk logs multiple times. Obviously, it's the kind of thing you can sell as many times as you like. And like I said, access as a service is a big thing. So someone, actually, if you read through the whole of this advertisement, I don't know if I will give you time to do that or not, but it's in our half-year threat report if you want to see this and much more. This is actual being offered by an insider at a huge global organization involved in insurance and medical claims, buildings inspection. They've got access, the seller is boasting access to all of the emergency response centers in the US and all of the fire departments, including military. And this person is an insider, they say at the end of the advertisement, and they're selling credentials that would give an attacker access to the entire network and all the databases. So it's commercial as well, and it's a big deal. And not only is it commercial, it's also national. We're seeing increasingly services and data for sale in underground fora that offer propaganda services and information required to do that kind of nation state aligned influencing of large populations. It started out, I think, that economy as the social network economy, how to buy likes and how to boost posts. And it was aimed at individuals who wanted to increase their audience on social media. But of course, that's a hugely valuable tool now for propaganda purposes, for boosting and amplifying fake news and stories of that nature. So we're seeing a lot of that and a lot of data to support that for sale in these forums. You can see databases for sale here. There was a huge list of US voter databases for sale, each one individually itemized to give you a sense of what you're paying for. And these are all from users that had established reputations who I'm very certain wouldn't be offering for sale things they don't have because it would severely damage their standing in that community. And of course, it's targeted. You know, one of the prime uses for this kind of information, beyond the obvious spamming and email-borne attacks, is for intelligence gathering for targeted attacks. It all begins with that intelligence gathering, whether that's using social network and open source intelligence, or whether that's using that fourth kind of data I was talking about earlier on, stolen data. So what does this mean? What does this mean for enterprises? It means that you're up against it. And actually, when I said we were going to refer to the pandemic in different terms, it means that we're now running to stand still in terms of catching up with changes that the pandemic has brought. I used to talk about this architectural scenario in terms of the coming future for enterprises. The pandemic has really accelerated this. This is what I think the enterprise of the extremely near future will look like if it doesn't already in some cases. The organization of the future owns no infrastructure. Everything is as a service. It's focused solely on IT solutions which are dedicated to the business. It doesn't run IT for IT's sake. You know, the realization that you don't become a world-beating organization by being the best at running Active Directory isn't a tough one to arrive at. So that kind of stuff is as a service. The users, the connected users, could be anywhere in the world, and each user will have a different profile depending on where they are, what project they're working on, what time of day it is, what sort of network they're logging in from, what kind of endpoint they're logging in from, and your security and authentication and identification and authorization of users will have to dynamically adapt to all of those different profiles, if you like, and be able to switch between them. Not just users, connected devices, every sensor, every actuator, every factory floor, every medical facility. All of these create this new subscriber class. Sitting in the middle, business processes, like I say, IT that's focused on the business. Security ignores the network, the zero trust model. Everything is hostile anyway, all networks are hostile. And in terms of the enterprise, it's now creating mountains of data beyond the scope of humans to deal with in a timely fashion. So leaning heavily into AI and machine learning just to help the business run. Any legacy deployments will be using container technology to enable you to build that container with all the dependencies you need. And any future forward-looking deployments will be serverless deployments, because all of your stuff that was previously internal now has to be made available to this hugely distributed, highly mobile, work from home workforce. And of course, a byproduct means we're going to see a lot of commercial and buildings and office space being sold off and reconverted, I think, into communal working areas or accommodation, or I think the character of our high streets is going to change hugely in the very near term as a part of this. So that's the big challenge. And the areas of concern for me are these. We are shifting from hardware-defined networks to very volatile, very software-defined networks, particularly with the advent of 5G. How does your security keep up? How do your policies keep up? Machine to machine and massive Internet of Things means we have a whole new subscriber type to deal with when it comes to IAM. How do we compensate? How do we keep up? And how do we make it more dynamic and push computing out to the edge? How do we deal with all of the data? We just kind of spoke about that. And it really critically, data usage patterns are shifting enormously. It's no more data-centric use, but it's cloud-centric use. And as a result of that, security must be user-centric and user-focused. You can't secure your data center and secure your data. You now have to kind of build security focused on the individual and the profile that's in use at the time. And of course, all of this creates this exponentially greater attack surface at exactly the same time when we're facing a skills gap in the industry and we have to work out how to bring new people in. So hopefully these are all areas that we can address. And I haven't told the panelists this, but hopefully these are all areas that we can address within the panel shortly. There's certainly areas that kind of go around my head at the moment. There's things that we need as an industry to think about. The sad reality of today is this: the typical security operations center of today is drowning in a huge volume of alerts. There was a survey carried out by Ovum of financial organizations, but I don't think the responses are exclusively the domain of financial institutions. I think they are broadly duplicated across industry verticals. That 60% of the banks that responded said they routinely dealt with over 100,000 alerts every 24 hours in their security operations center. 17% of them said they dealt with over 300,000 alerts every 24 hours in their security operations center. There is no way that any SOC is staffed to the levels required to deal with that volume of alerts, which means that a large number of them are simply never being actioned or perhaps just being ignored. There aren't enough hours in the day. Typically, SOC analyst spends about 25-30 minutes on an alert, and most of that time is either reprioritizing something that was wrongly prioritized, identifying a false positive, or downgrading critical alerts to deal with at a later date. That's the bulk of the time, believe it or not. So to give you an illustration of what that looks like, if you do some quick maths, it becomes rapidly, abundantly clear that no SOC can deal with that volume. And this is where we are today. This is why we need to lean into the machine learning in a big way. Because 25 minutes of work per alert for 100,000 alerts is 41,667 hours of work in every 24-hour period. So if you convert that into person hours, any enterprise dealing with that volume of alerts would need a SOC team of 1,736 people just to keep up with the triage. That's without even acting on the alerts that you've received. And that's the unfortunate reality of today, of security, cybersecurity in an enterprise today. That's why we need to change the way we do things from a vendor perspective, but also critically from an architectural perspective within commercial organizations. If data is the new oil, something I said at the beginning and something which I said is a hackneyed phrase, then algorithms are the new refineries. It's what we do with the data that we generate that's really going to make a difference. How do we successfully mine it and turn it into something meaningful for our business? So with that in mind, I wanted to leave you at least with not a sense of despair, but hopefully some areas that it's worth investigating and looking into. We're not going to solve the skills shortage within a decade. Arguably, we're not going to solve it at all, particularly if we focus on filling the gap with human brains. That's not the way we're going to do it. The problem is not in the recruitment pipeline. The problem is in the data pipeline. We continue to generate more and more data. No matter how many people we throw at it, the skills gap isn't going to resolve this for us. So these are the areas, from my perspective, that I would recommend that you focus on as a business. Find out how machine learning can help your business, do more quickly with more. Work out how you can orchestrate and automate security more effectively. And in many cases, trust your security platform to take care of those tier 1 cases in an autonomous fashion for you. Steep learning curve, but to my mind, that is the art of cybersecurity. I can see chat things going on here. So let me stop sharing. It's weird to be fully in control of an event and yet see and hear from no one. What's chat telling me? They're telling me, okay, nothing important. I have no idea how long I spoke to you. Hopefully I'm conveying a sense of urgency and makes it feel like I haven't been speaking for very long. That's the aim of the game. I think I'm open to questions right now about the stuff that I've spoken about. I can see the first one pop. Someone had that on the clipboard ready to go because no one types that fast. Alan Cooney, thank you for listening and participating. The question, I don't think you can read the questions. I think only I can, so I will read it for you. It says, excellent presentation. Thank you. In this era of surveillance capitalism, does the rest of the world need to adopt more rigorous data protection regimes similar to the EU's GDPR to ensure organizations take their data protection responsibilities more seriously? Yes. In short, yes, they do. We do need more GDPR-like legislation globally. We do see it. In the US, it tends to start in California and roll and then replicate on the East Coast and then roll in towards the centers on a state-by-state basis. They were the first, for example, to have breach disclosure legislation in the US, and now every state has it. There also seems to be a legislation escalation between the EU and Canada. So whenever one does something, the other kind of one-ups them and makes a slightly more focused or slightly more stringent regulation. So expect to see something coming from North America to refine and improve on GDPR. Of course, there's room for improvement. But the world is bigger than North America and Europe, of course, and we all know where large quantities of cybercrime come from. Former USSR, Russia in particular, China, and Brazil is the home of, spiritual home of banking malware, for example. So that's the challenge. And it's the challenge with law enforcement as well. How do you persuade nations, governments, international organizations like the Commonwealth of Independent States in the former USSR, how do you persuade them to adopt and critically to abide by similar kinds of legislation? That's for me the big challenge, and that's more a challenge of international diplomacy than cybercrime. We do work hand in hand. I was in December last year, for example, speaking at the UN to a large group of stakeholders, including nation states. And one of the topics that was raised was, that I raised actually, was for an international cyber criminal court. So obviously there were some nations that went, yeah, great idea, and a lot that were a little scared by that proposition. Sean, does two-factor authentication for account logins protect adequately today, or is that even at risk with all the data mining of user data? I suppose it depends on the flavor of your 2FA at the end of the day. If you're using what should be called two-step authentication using SMSs, then you're definitely not protecting adequately, particularly in an enterprise scenario. SIM jacking is definitely a thing, and anyway, it's not two-factor authentication, it's two-step. It's two different passwords, effectively, at the end of the day, that you enter into an interface. I love, for example, technology like Duo, which doesn't rely on a second typed password. It actually is a proper other factor of something you own, usually being your mobile device. 2FA is I don't think you have an option. You should absolutely be using 2FA, and I think you would be found negligent in any case where a breach had occurred and you weren't using that. It is extra security. Does it protect adequately? A lot of attacks don't rely on compromising credentials in the first place. For example, they rely on compromising vulnerabilities within an ecosystem. So it protects against the things it's designed to protect against, but that's not everything, I guess, is the brief answer. I wish I could see your faces because I have no idea if you think I've answered your question or not. I'll carry on. Oh, here's a poll, audience poll. It just popped up just like that. Have you seen an increase in the number of cyber incidents impacting on your business since COVID-19 struck? That's an interesting question. I'll save my opinion until the results show up. So remember the exact wording: an increase in the total number of cyber incidents. Let's see. 50-50 again. Wow. Yeah, my opinion is that we haven't seen a cybercrime spike. Certainly, if we look at trend micro data and compare it year on year to the number of things happening, there hasn't been a massive spike in cybercrime. There has been a massive spike in the lures and tactics that people are using. So the number of emails we've seen that use COVID-19 as a lure, the number of website and domains registered that have something to do with COVID-19, these have all skyrocketed. But that's because criminal attention is focused on using that as a lure, not because there are more attacks, if you know what I mean. God, I've totally lost track of time. People will never ask me to MC again, but I feel like there are loads of questions coming in, and I promise that I will answer these either within the panel or I will write answers and they can be shared. But I won't leave any question unanswered, okay? That's a guarantee. But I feel like we should probably move into the panel, otherwise nobody else gets to speak. And again, I'm trusting in the technology. Oh, I just got a secret private message that says I'm doing okay time-wise. That's very good. So I think I'm trusting in the technology to introduce these panelists to you in the order that I'm going to say their names. We haven't practiced this. So if you would please join me in welcoming our panelists. First of all, Donna O'Shea. Bing. Bing. Donna O'Shea is the chair of cybersecurity at the Cork Institute of Technology. We're also joined by Anthony. Ah, there's Donna. Can you hear me, Brazil?
Yes, I can hear you, Rick. Thank you.
Excellent. Welcome, Donna. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Anthony is here as well. I can see Anthony's just popped up. And Danny. Okay, so Anthony is the Chief Information Officer at the Carberry Group. Thank you, Anthony, for joining us. And Danny got a promotion yesterday. Am I right, Danny?
Yes, Rick. Very right. So.
Yeah. Former head of cyber, and as of yesterday, now EMA cyber leader for KPMG. Congratulations on that.
Thank you, Rick.
And thank you for joining us as well. Maybe it's a good idea, and this is every panelist's nightmare, but I only want you to use maybe 2 sentences. And we'll start with you, Danny, seeing as your face is biggest on my screen right now. If you could just say, and maybe you don't even know yet, but if you could just give us a couple of sentences about your role and responsibilities so that everyone gets a sense of how they can relate to you professionally.
That's a good one. So that is my role of yesterday. Perhaps it's an easier way to start. So I lead the KPMG cybersecurity teams in Ireland. Previously, I was actually leading the Asia Pacific cybersecurity teams with KPMG, and as of yesterday, I'm the new EMEA cybersecurity lead. So what does it mean is, I do advise our clients on everything to do with cyber, which is a very narrow field, right? As we all agree. We look at, as a leader of the team, I definitely look at having the right solutions, having the right insights, possibly looking for challenging situations with clients as well, because I do believe as professionals, that's the best thing can happen to you. The bigger the challenge, the better the learning, right?
Yeah.
As the EMA lead, though, I think I look forward to working with the community more broadly, and that means more collaborations, both within KPMG member firms, but also outside companies like yours, and of course, more than that, organizations such as WEF, Europol, etc., right? So we are looking to, in a ways, how can we make that whole situation a bit better, right? So I always say one thing, right? Try and make something better than you found it. Yeah.
Very good, thank you. Okay, and Anthony, you, the Chief Information Officer, you probably have a bunch of peers in the audience doing very similar roles. What's specific about your role at the Carberry Group?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Carberry Group. So we're primarily a food manufacturer, right? So we're in the dairy and nutrition business. We've 11 sites globally, all around the world. And I suppose as CIO, I'm responsible for everything IT. But cybersecurity is definitely kind of blasting its way right to the top of the food chain in terms of the roles and responsibilities, right? And I think it's, you know, for us, let's say coming into the role initially, because I'm just in the role since the start of this year, a big part of the role from a cyber perspective is really educating the business on the dangers of kind of living in the world that we live in today. And that makes up a large part of my role at the very, I suppose, at the very start. Being a manufacturer, not too different from any other manufacturers in our field, we always expect that, cyber isn't a topic for us. And that was a large part of my role coming in there, right? Just to, I suppose, educate the business and make sure that the protections that we require in today's world exist as well, right? So that took up a large part of my role very early on.
Okay, thank you very much. And Donna, how about you? What does your role entail?
Hi, Rick. So as you said already, my name is Donna O'Shea. I actually hold two positions at the moment. My current position is that I'm Chair of Cybersecurity in Cork Institute of Technology. And this is a government-funded position to address specifically, I suppose, the huge gender imbalance that exists in the academic sector across the higher education institutes in Ireland. And I secured this position under a Senior Academic Leadership Award, which was to help break the glass ceilings that I suppose women currently face across the academic sector. And 20 professorship posts were created across the academic sector, and I secured one of these posts in the area of cybersecurity. And my position really is to work with the government and also to work with CIT, which is my employer, obviously, and with Cyber Ireland, and to build strength and capacity in this critical area of importance nationally and to CIT, and to build on the success of Cyber Ireland and to work with national and regional stakeholders to ensure that Ireland becomes a critical focus in cybersecurity skills training and research. So I'm also head of department of computer science in Cork Institute of Technology as well at the moment. And I'm also a principal investigator at a Science Foundation Ireland research centre called Confirm, and also an investigator in two other SFI research centres, Connect and Enable. But my primary area of expertise really lies in the area of cybersecurity, and in particular enterprise cybersecurity. And I was very interested in your presentation, Rick, and I agreed an awful lot about your vision in looking at SDN and NFE security and network slicing and how the challenges around network and service and management are going to emerge as we evolve towards this 5G virtualized cloud-based infrastructure. So that's basically my role.
It's fantastic. It's a really, congratulations ITU Cork for putting this panel together. I can take no credit for it, but it's a really fantastic spread of skills and expertise among the three of you. We have an advisory role, we have a practitioner role, and we have an academic and a national role. So, right, let's get into it. I'm going to actually, for the first question, I'm going to abandon the list of questions that I have in front of me, because I always find that more exciting when you don't know what I'm going to ask you. But you can, I think you guys can see the Q&A as well. And there's one from Gillian that stood out there. And if you want to throw any other questions into the panel, feel free as we go along. But Gillian says here, as the landscape gets more complicated and complex, what new things do individuals need to look out for to protect themselves online? For example, connected devices, smart plugs, etc. But I think it's a lot broader than that. And I think that's a great question for you, Danny, to start with, because I know that your previous focus was IoT at KPMG before you're doing what you're doing now, and you have a bunch of other expertise too. So what do you think about that as a question?
It's actually quite an interesting one, because that's on top of everything that's been my personal interest as well for years, right? When we look at the way, I'll say, technology is becoming more pervasive in homes, right? And users, I start looking at myself as a normal user, right? So when you start realizing how many devices you start connecting in your own network, everything from humidity control monitoring to smart lights to smart TVs. So one of my neighbors recommended I should get a smart coffee machine, which I perhaps was not super excited about. But the reality of things is that more and more pervasively technology hits the homes, right? And I have been fortunate enough, and actually even in fact as we speak, I'm working with a number of government institutions around the world, trying to talk about, well, are there requirements and clear requirements to start with manufacturers of those devices, then to move on to operators, and integrators and developers, and then in the end of the day to the users. And the users is really a broad definition of those around the world, including individuals like us, in terms of what the expectations are in relation to those, I would say, smart / Internet of Things, the things complex, I call them devices, right? I feel everybody has a role to play, right? But I do feel that there is insufficient requirements yet established around the whole ecosystem of play here, right? I don't think it's fair to come and say to individual in the house.
You mean requirements on manufacturers and service providers, or requirements around?
I believe throughout, right? So I don't think they're consistent global requirements in a way, right? So what you see is, yes, there's great initial steps down by NISA and by a number of different European countries. But when I look at it on a global scale, and my previous role was, in fact, to look at the global IT deployments, the reality is that that's not the case, right? We don't necessarily have a consistent requirements throughout the world, which say this is the way we define an IT ecosystem. This is the way we actually would have consistent requirements towards manufacturers and users, right? It really depends on the region and the country. So I don't think it's a fair question, or it's a fair expectation that every single user should fully understand what their requirements are. Yeah, we all can have a good practice. You should potentially say, well, when I connect this device, do I even understand if it has a default password, or even better, no password, or one of the best passwords, password 123 or admin, right? And what does it mean, right? What does it mean when they actually do connect to me? Do I then expose the rest of my environment, or I don't? But I do think that it starts even before that, right? Do we fully grasp the complexity of manufacturer and sensor manufacturers actually having ability to deploy security by, I call it by default, right? And are there mandatory government requirements to do so? The answer is not really, right? It depends on which country and which jurisdiction you fall in. So I do think it's a bit more complex question, but it's one of huge importance to me. I think one which is definitely gonna grow in importance in the next 3 to 5 years as 5G hits in, and I'm sure we'll see. We saw Mirai a couple of years ago in Singapore. We've seen a number of different IoT devices used as a attack surface, right? So it's really quite a crucial question. So I think it's education, and what individuals can do is actually understand at least what are they buying and what does it mean, and are there any basic, I call them basic security controls. I feel very strange because 20 years later in cybersecurity, we're still talking about password complexity, right? It's just the basic concepts is still something we're struggling with. So it's really go back to basics. If you're individual, think about, well, when I connect, do I understand what else I actually expose within my own environment? Am I happy with that? And sometimes, you might be happy with some of it, right? Sometimes you might not be. But then again, I think that there's a call for action where I think organizations, individuals, governments, and broad institutions should be taking a step to look at how do we guide at national industry level what is to come, right? And for me, that's really the bigger challenge here. Now, pause.
And that must have been a challenge for you, Anthony, as well, because you said yourself, you came into your role at the beginning of this year. And at the beginning of this year, everything looked normal. Yep. And quite soon, everything began to look extremely abnormal. So you, Anthony, must have come up hard against the challenge of how do we continue to do business with a distributed workforce of people at home, using home technologies and home networks to connect to a highly sensitive corporate environment. Yeah. Or other things. I mean, you tell me.
Yeah, I mean, look, for sure, that was a challenge that faced everyone during COVID, right? Suddenly you had, 70% upwards of your workforce that is now working from home on their own connections. Do they have proper 2FA in place, et cetera, right? So that was a massive adjustment for us and like everyone else in our industry, that we had to pivot overnight, right? And some of us that had been using legacy technology, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, like the two-step authentication, not two-factor authentication, that had to be switched out very, very quickly. And I think that was something that thankfully the majority of us overcame. And I think we've all probably heard that, COVID drove the digital transformation for a lot of companies. And I think that's very true. I think what's kind of interesting for me on the question that came in as well, right, is that, so we have our professional lives, right, and we rely on enterprise grade cybersecurity in the back end, but it's also, what practical steps can we take to protect our own accounts, right? Because we always talk about the enterprise, and, I suppose since I started kind of getting into it in my own role, I became very paranoid around my own personal accounts, right? So everything I have right now that can have two-factor authentication across, my LinkedIn accounts, everything else has that enabled, right? And it's quite interesting because I thought a few months ago I was protected. I mean, just on my Amazon account with the two-step authentication, right? And I found that was hacked overnight, right? And I think it's very interesting to kind of look at kind of how, it's not just companies, it's not the multinationals. And think back to the polling question earlier, is it multinationals that are only being targeted? Largely it is a mix of both, but I think the slim pickings are, the SMEs that don't have cybersecurity organizations. It's the individuals that they can steal, $1,000 or $2,000 from very, very easily, right? And I think all these practical steps kind of need to eke their way into our personal lives as well, right? So I would certainly recommend, exactly what Danny was saying around the connected devices. I mean, we all have them at home. We have the Wi-Fi CCTV cameras, we have the Wi-Fi doorbells, we have the Wi-Fi sockets, all that type of thing, right? And sometimes you get what you pay for. If you buy cheap, you get cheap cybersecurity with them, and I suppose that's just something that we always have to be very, very conscious of, right? That I would certainly recommend simple steps like 2FA across the board for everyone's personal accounts.
Another thing that jumped out at me when I moved house very recently and had to rebuild and reconfigure everything. It suddenly struck me that every router that is for sale out there right now and is implemented in home environments has UPnP enabled by default. And it's little things like that represent a super easy route into your home network to take advantage of those devices that you might think are not exposed at all. They're just in your house. But sometimes, security by default, it's still a long way off for things that we've been talking about for a long time. I didn't even see the whole question. I wonder what the answer is. Are additional resources being hired in your company as a result of the current threat landscape? As a result of, I'm surprised by that, to be honest. I think overwhelmingly no, I suppose, 39% of people. But I'm surprised that 35% are saying they are hiring more people as a result of the current threat landscape. Because I'm not doing your job, for example, I'm not running a security department. I'm looking at threats, and maybe I have a different perspective than you. I would argue that your hiring is probably more as a result of the current technology landscape and maybe a little bit of COVID rather than the threat landscape, but I could be way off base there.
Yeah, I think for sure. No, you're absolutely spot on. I think, what we are potentially hiring is more outside services. It's not, we're not hiring employees, we're kind of moving more to the cloud, as you alluded to earlier, right? For us, it's push as much as we can out as quickly as we possibly can as well, right? So it's not that we're hiring more people internally to kind of protect the assets that we have. We're pushing more of the assets out to have less internally, right? Just as you alluded to earlier.
Yeah, and I would agree there perhaps with Anthony as well, Rick, right? Because, and with yourself, I don't think that the threat landscape has shifted as such, right? It's changed in terms of focus, I would say, and in the end, criminals are criminals and they still want to make money, right? Just that they found a couple of new surfaces, right? So, and in fact, just I was listening as you were saying earlier, in fact, earlier in the year, we did see a decrease in some of the organized criminal activity as the lockdowns were in place, because, again, depending on which threat actor you speak about, they were disrupted in their own operations, right? You can't move and you can't operate transnational call centers because everybody's locked down, then you need to think about and rethink your business. So it was interesting actually when we noticed for about 2 and a bit months, there was slight reduction of some of the, I would say, more commoditized ransomware cases, right? Which picked up then in a bigger and more exciting one and more tailored way, right? But I agree with Anthony as well, because most of our clients are looking not so much for internal people who are doing all the same stuff. We're looking for people who understand how the new technology landscape and new changing architectures actually has to be deployed in a more safe way. And in fact, actually, a lot of our clients are trying to leapfrog and implement some of the security controls via that new digital channels, right? Which retrospectively, if you look at it, it's going to be far more costly and time consuming if you're doing it on old infrastructure. So it's really interesting shift in my view, right? All the cloud security requirements which are coming up, solutioning architecture in cloud governance, right? Ability to deal with hybrid cloud situations, multi-cloud tenants, etc., right? So somehow you see, and maybe that's interesting for Donna later, but you see that shift in skill set a little bit, and it's one to think about whether security actually 2 years from now, 3 years from now would be what it's actually today, right? So it's quite interesting to watch that.
I mentioned something there. When you were doing your introduction, Donna, you spoke about, you referenced back to the 5G thing, and about the security challenges there with network slicing, for example, and how do we architect forward-facing security. And I know that obviously your work that's with government in Ireland, that must be something that's already coming up in conversation, and certainly from a business perspective, it's only going to increase rapidly in importance. So what are the challenges there as far as you're concerned, Donna, when it comes to that new 5G Industry 4.0 hyper-connected environment?
Yeah, I am working with government actively in looking at this, and government is undergoing a review at the moment and looking at our specific security requirements in line with the EU requirements as well. I guess, like, if you look at the various generations of mobile communications, the first generation of mobile communications about voice, and second was about voice and texting, and third was about voice, texting and data, and 4G was about 3G but faster, and 5G will be faster again, providing this unique I suppose combination of high-speed connectivity, ultra-reliable, very low latency, and ubiquitous coverage. And this technology is going to enable, I suppose, smart vehicles, transport infrastructure such as connected cars, and a split-second delay will mean the difference between, a smooth flow of traffic versus a major incident with life fatalities. And 5G is a very complicated and integrated infrastructure, and 5G refers to the entire ecosystem, including the Internet of Things, Industry 4.0 and cloud. And 5G is the first generation of mobile communications that basically used virtualization and cloud-based technology in mind. And this is the differentiating factor between 5G versus 4G. And I guess the reality is there are always been security challenges across the various generations of mobile communications. In first generation of mobile communications, there was a problem with illegal cloning. And in second generation, message spamming became a problem. And the third generation, suddenly we had this IP-based communication, and suddenly network operators had to deal with the security challenges and vulnerabilities dealing with IP. And 4G had to deal with this huge proliferation of smart devices, and it had to scale its response in terms of security, vulnerabilities, and threats. But the difference is that with 5G, you have SDN, which is software-defined networking, network function virtualization, and increased reliance on softwareization in your network core, multi-tenancy, and cloud. And there is no longer this idea that you're going to have this physical perimeter, because there is going to be no notion of a fixed perimeter, because there are going to be no dedicated hardwares, and all the firewalls and routers are going to no longer exist in physical boxes. They're going to be virtualized using NFV. And because 5G is not an incremental advancement, we need to absolutely redesign our security infrastructure at the core of telecom operators. And this looks, and what that means is that we need to look at security by design. We need to look at the whole host of services that we're going to be supporting across the various verticals. We're going to have to look at the challenges around network slicing. We're going to have to look at how SDN and NFV allow for these great technological evolutions, but by their nature, they're a new technology, and they also introduce new threats, vulnerabilities, and challenges. And we have to make the core infrastructure very secure.
For those people that are actually going to be implementing 5G as an infrastructure, the learning curve, I think, is really steep, right? It's not that you can take and apply much of what you already know. There are certain key concepts, but it's a steep learning curve. There's a lot of new stuff that you're going to have to do as a network professional, as a security professional, as a SOC analyst, whatever role you're in. So here's an interesting question then, based on that, Donna. I'm old enough to remember when TCP/IP was a choice, and the networks that we were using when I first started my career had a whole bunch of different protocols on them, whether that was IPX, SPX, EtherTalk, token ring networks, as well as a whole bunch of different cables as well, actually. 10 base 2, 10 base 5, 10 base T, and TCP/IP was just one protocol among many. It feels like we're heading back into a diverging area of network, physical network topologies, which I'll include software-defined in for the sake of argument, and protocols. But do you think that's a temporary state of affairs, and that everything, and I mean everything in the way that everything is now TCP/IP, do you think everything will end up operating over 5G networks in the future, that we'll basically wave goodbye to the networks that we know and love in inverted commas today?
Yeah, I think that 5G will be just one piece of a technology ecosystem that we're going to need to support the wide range of applications across the various verticals. So 5G, will, it's supposed to enable these smart vehicles, autonomous vehicles, but the next generation of Wi-Fi within smart factories could also enable these type of smart manufacturing and Industry 4 applications. And then you also have LoRa and other technologies that would also support 5G, I suppose, in enabling this hyperconnectivity and these new range of applications. So I don't think that 5G is going to be the answer to everything. I think it's going to be a solution to a lot of things, but it's going to exist within a kind of a complex ecosystem of complementary technologies to enable these wide range and, I suppose, highly demanding complex applications. That's the way I see it in the future.
So that leads me on to, and I apologize, panelists, all three, because I've totally abandoned the list of questions that I had in front of me now, but this is far more interesting. It leads me on to another question then, which is, and I think there was one that came into the audience that prompted me thinking down this line. If we continue with this diverse suite, and I'd be interested, Danny and Anthony, in both of your responses, and I think we'll go Anthony, Danny, just because you're that way across the top of my screen. If we are then moving forwards into this diverse wired, traditional wireless, and 5G topology for every business, so that's kind of, you've got a lot of different technology from a lot of different vendors, is basically what I'm driving at there. From a security perspective, would you rather be looking at unifying security as much as possible, anyway, under a single platform, a single vendor, a single pane of glass? Or given that everything is very diverse, do you think it will be more beneficial to you as a CIO or as an advisor to CIOs to make sure that you're focusing on a best of breed solution for every individual use case, and then doing your best behind the scenes to integrate them?
Yes, so for us, I guess, and this was kind of our personal approach. We went with the single vendor approach, right? But that vendor had to be, I suppose, exactly as you mentioned, right? It had to be best of breed, but it had to be quite agnostic in terms of the landscape that we had, right? So, could that vendor integrate with our Palo Alto firewalls that we had implemented globally, right? And could it do so seamlessly, right? So we went with this single vendor, covering us from endpoint, from server, from cloud, from network, and hopefully into the OT arena. And look, this isn't an advertisement, but let's say we went with Trend Micro, and we're super happy with that.
You did. I was going to make a joke out of that and say, Trend Micro is glad to have you. I had no idea. Fantastic.
Yeah, but look, very happy with that. And I suppose the reason for us kind of going with the single vendor as well, right, was, personally, I just wanted to avoid any potential finger pointing. Should an incident arise, I wanted to be with one house, and let's say us to have full visibility end to end, right? And I suppose that's essentially why we went with it, right? But I think the important thing for us as well is that we kind of go with a vendor that can grow with where we want to be in a couple of years' time, right? So, our next battleground is OT. And that's something that we're looking for, as we were selecting a vendor, we're looking for a vendor that can, as I say, kind of grow with us into that next battlefield, right? Because I think it's important that, that we don't stand still. We just have to constantly evolve. And let's say us picking that vendor that could evolve with us was super important. So that's just the way we went. I'm not saying it's the way that everyone should go, but that was just our personal approach.
Absolutely. Okay. And Danny, actually, let's just do the answer to this poll. Let's have a look. Plans for cybersecurity training in the next 12 months? Yes, good, well done. What can I say? You should have, and not just in the next 12 months, but all year, every year, at random times of the year, all the time. Keep driving the message home. That's what you should do. Danny, what's your perspective, or KPMG's perspective, either or both, on the best of breed single platform facing up to the challenges of the future issue?
I applied 2 views, right? So I've been fortunate or so unfortunate to be a CISO 3 times in my life, right? In a large program. So I don't think there is a single approach to the situation, right? If you're a smaller organization, right, it may make sense that you actually, as Anthony was saying, you may go for more single vendor providing an end-to-end visibility solution, etc. However, even that specific vendor will have to interoperate with the rest, because there's no single vendor who is able to cover every single technology landscape you have. But that unification process could be done that way. I also want to think about that a bit broadly, right? So as organizations and organizational boundaries start to expand and actually diminish in a way, right? And the more open architecture you start seeing, I actually think it becomes even more challenging to have a single vendor looking at things. And I do tend to challenge when I was a CISO for a very, very large organization, I think the biggest challenge I could give vendors is, so how do you share the best of your own solutions in intelligence, and how do you actually make it work for me as a client, right? Because I do believe that, it's not a competition between who is the best, etc., right? I do think there's different focus of the vendors. If you're, let's say, and Donna was talking about a telecommunication companies, well, I was very fortunate to be a CISO of a telecom. And I would like to say, yeah, 5G would be the answer, it never would. It's my view, right? If you couldn't get 4G to answer all the questions you had, then why would you think that 5G is going to be the same, right? I actually think you'll still be landing up in a situation where you still have some legacy systems left. You still have some, the reality hits that, wow, and as a consultant, right? I can say if I wear my consulting hat, yeah, ideally I would like to virtualize and move everything on cloud. But the practicality is that might take you 20 to 30 years before you're able to do that. So the practical then situation is, how can I use the best of breed of the new tech which is coming out, right? And I'll take Trend Micro, Microsoft, Google, right? There's Amazon, etc., right? So there's an amazing innovation in the space when it comes down to what can you do on the cloud platforms. And as Donna was alluding to, the SDN security stacks, ability to implement them across. But then the problem is that as you start hitting on the legacy systems and large infrastructures and multinational clients who've been there for like 50 years, then the reality hits that maybe, well, okay, I maybe not be able so practically to move everything. So it's really then about coming back to the vendors. For me, it's try and use as much as possible of the new tech to unify across a single one. Then try and bring interoperability with the rest, and really try and define how they can stack against each other or with each other to give you an end-to-end view. So I love a situation where Microsoft, Trend, and FireEye, for example, can interoperate, or CrowdStrike can interoperate with FireEye and Trend Micro, etc., right? Because you get really enriched data sets, and you're able to actually look at things and write upon the best capabilities of vendors, right? And it's just to name a few, right? But to me, there's, again, that's why I was saying, in short, I don't think there is a single answer. I do think it depends on the size of the environment, it depends on the complexity of the environment, it depends on the age of the environment, right? How much legacy you're actually dealing with, right? And if you know what, if you're completely in a startup, fully on cloud, I think I would like to be your CISO, because, practically you have far less issues to worry about if you adopt the correct tech on cloud, right? So that's my view.
You raised an interesting point, and again, it goes back to one of the 3 points that was in that last slide of areas where I was saying I think business should focus some attention on being forward-looking. Like for example, you're talking about rich data sets from multiple different vendors, and how do I get the best out of that? The commercial reality is that in many cases, competing vendors are never going to partner up, right? Complementary vendors will, competing vendors almost never will, other than cosmetically, that sometimes happens for marketing or PR purposes. So I think one of the areas of focus, and Donna, I'd love to hear your view on this, is the recommendation that businesses focus on machine learning as something that's focused on their business to help their business do better. Obviously, as a vendor, among many others, we have been using machine learning for over a decade now in various different growing ways, whether that's identifying spam, finding new exploits or vulnerabilities, looking for malware, analyzing people's handwriting style, typing style, many different ways to use it. And that's for our business, and we make our business of making security products work better by leveraging machine learning. I think at the moment, and I'd love to hear your view, a lot of companies are not investing time in how can they benefit from machine learning themselves in their own business, rather relying on vendors to make something for them. But I would love to hear how much effort you think organizations, and obviously again, I guess potential recruitment then as well, or upskilling, should be focusing on machine learning to make their own businesses better.
Yeah. I think that machine learning is and deep learning is going to be of critical importance to, I suppose, vendors trying to differentiate their products in the future. I do think there are particular challenges in using machine learning, especially within a cybersecurity context. So, machine learning could be used to, predict errors or failures. It can be used to detect anomaly detection. The challenge is that an anomaly is just one piece of data within a huge data set, and there's a whole challenge there around this unbalanced data and being able to train your model to be able to uniquely identify this anomaly, and that's one issue. What we're also finding, say, within the within the smart manufacturing and OT environment, is that the machine learning models can become, I suppose, corrupted or attacked as well. So let's just say you're an attacker and you've, there's a model there that is used to make a decision, and you're using that within a manufacturing company making drugs, and you have some way of actually corrupting the model. Then even just a very slight change in the model will basically impact the drug being produced, and that can have a huge, I suppose, implication in terms of life and death scenarios. And this is called adversarial machine learning. So while machine learning is I suppose, again, an opportunity of actually being able to predict and detect anomalies and, I suppose, threats from cyber criminals, the models themselves can become a source of threat if they're not actually protected. And I think that's what vendors and, I suppose, the research community need to address as a challenge.
Yeah, and it's a whole new unexplored area for businesses as well, not just pure in infrastructure and architecture, but you begin then to talk about securing the integrity of intellectual property, which is a very different challenge. We haven't really, from a security perspective anyway, we haven't very much focused on integrity other than technologies like file integrity monitoring to see if something has been changed, but then not to focus, for example, on process integrity, which is where machine learning would massively come into play. So it's a whole new area to explore.
Yes.
I'm coming up hard against the 11:15, which I'm told is the time when we need to think about closing. So I wanted to give each one of you a chance, and we'll stick with you, Donna, because you're the biggest face on my screen right now. Okay, we'll have a poll first. This is shocking. Has your company a clear picture of the cybersecurity skills we need in the coming 1 to 3 years? There should be a fourth option. Yes, now that we've attended this presentation. So if you say yes, absolutely, we claim credit for that. This panel claims credit for you saying yes. Don't say no now, that'd be awful. You have a clear picture of the cybersecurity skills that you need in your organization in the coming 1 to 3 years. Brilliant, well done, and thank you for attending. No, that's good, it's good. It means that you are focusing not just on fighting the fires of today, but making sure that you are aware of where the gaps are within the security function of your organization. So that's a great response. Donna, what I was going to ask you, and actually this is a question for each of you in turn, and again, we'll go in the order you are across the top of my Zoom here, which is Donna, Anthony, Danny. So Danny, you get the final word. You're in the midst of a cyber attack on your organization. You get to give one piece of advice to everybody that's listening right now. What's your, I mean, there's a lot of advice. What's top of your list, Donna?
Okay, well, I'd probably go back to before the cyber attack, and especially given the fact that we're in COVID-19, I think it's just useful just to talk about user behavior just for a moment, because there was a survey commissioned by Microsoft about 18 months ago, and it was the first ever survey of employees across the island of Ireland, interviewing 700 employees in Southern Ireland and 200 in Northern Ireland. And it asked about user behavior and people from working from home. And 56% of respondents claimed that they could actually work from home, and 32% doing at least once a week. And the cohort from working from home were found to engage in much more risky security behavior. And this risky security behavior included 32% of respondents admitting to using their personal email account in work. And this rose to 49% from those working from home. And 10% admitted to sharing work material with a family friend using their mobile, increasing to 24% of those working from home. And 11% allowed a friend or family member access to their work devices, rising to 25% those from working home. And 56% of respondents admitted to using free or public Wi-Fi for work-related purposes, rising to 79% those from working from home. So I think that really, before the attack ever happens, companies need to invest in better security measures, and this needs to be implemented for remote working employees. And they need to advise to employees that cyber attacks are more likely to attack, and employees need to be aware of agreed working practices and take responsibility for their connected devices. We need to find a secure place from working from home. We need to make sure that people can't read our screens, and these are basics. Do you know what I mean? Never leave your devices unlocked. Don't reuse your password. And then there's also the technological solution that companies need to invest in, which include, using approved solutions, implementing security measures, ensuring remote access systems are fully patched and securely configured. But I think really the message that I'm trying to deliver here is that it's not just the infrastructure, it's also the user behavior. And it has been proven that people working from home are more likely to engage in risky security behavior, and we need to address that before an attack ever happens.
So what, more training and make it more personal and more relevant?
I think more training. I don't think companies have proper remote, I suppose, policies and procedures for people working from home. But the reality is we're all working from home at the moment, and we need to, I suppose, not just invest in the infrastructure, but also invest in the security and the training, and make employees and more aware of the impact of their behaviour on an organization's data, which, as you said already, is the oil and the actual value for the company. So that's the message. It's a very simple one. It's not a 5G technological NFV network slicing. It's a very simple message.
Excellent, thank you, Donna. Do you know what I've just realised? Oh my God, I'm just sitting crossing my arms while I'm listening to you talking. I brought a shirt down to wear for this, and I'm still sitting here in my Aerosmith t-shirt. Sorry.
You're only looking for compliments, Rick. You look amazing. You look amazing.
I'm not lying. It's my shirt I was supposed to be wearing. The joys of working from home. Anthony, you're in the middle of a cyber attack. What's your golden piece of advice? Yeah,
so look, I think in the past, right, there was this kind of expectation or this understanding that you're dealing with people that are working out of their parents' basements, right? And look, that absolutely isn't the case, right? I mean, these are multi-billion-dollar organizations, right, that are kind of carrying out these attacks, right? So look, I suppose, practical advice from my side, if you're in the midst of attack, I would say, obviously step number one is to try and get control of your network back. If that means, severing external ties or whatever it is that you have to do to get control of your network back is probably step number one. I would also go and, obviously reach out to the experts, whether they're, external or they're an internal team that you have as well, right, that kind of help you get the network back online. The other piece is it came up in conversations that actually I had with Danny and I had with Willie from Trend Micro as well in the past, right, was, until you know what you're willing to do about the attack is not to engage with the attackers as well, right, because in a lot of cases, they've thrown out a net and they don't realize who they've caught. So the second you engage, then they know who you are and they can kind of rank up the pressure on you as well, right? So I would say just not to engage until you know what you're willing to do, whether that means, you're going to tough it out and try to get yourself back online, whether they've gotten you to in such a way that paying the ransomware is the only way back potentially, but I would say not to engage until you're certain. And then I suppose the last piece, once you are coming back online is, I would say not to come back online until you're 100% right. I'm sure that they're no longer in the system or that there are no backdoors left as well, right? I think you should always, I'm super paranoid from a cyber perspective, right? And my team will tell you the same, right? I'm very, very paranoid about it. I would always assume that there's a second wave coming. And until you're 100% certain that you're clean, I wouldn't open the doors back up, right? And again, just back to this whole thing that you're dealing with multi-billion-dollar organizations, right? Very professionally run. They're not going to kind of hit you once and hope for the best, right? The best out there have a second back door back in, right? So I would just, advise, make sure that you're 100% certain until you kind of open the connection back up and get on with your life.
Very good. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you very much. Danny, how about you? You must have dealt.
As I've been flamed by fire multiple times, right? So what I've learned is step number one: keep your head cool. Tomorrow is gonna be worse than today, most likely, right? So it's keeping. Anthony's laughing, right? But it's the case, right? I always say for small organizations who have never been through a cyber attack, I give one advice, right? I typically walk in as the most, I jokingly say, maybe I act as a psychoanalyst, and you say basically, guys, don't panic, right? Keep your head cool and start thinking, right? And that's really, for me, the first thing you do, because people overreact. People, because you're dealing with unknown, right? So even if it's a very small thing, you imagine is the worst thing which ever happened to you, right? So to me, the first thing is, as I say, keep your head cool. The second thing will be call a friend, right? So there was this TV show, right? So I say dial a number and call a friend, right? And that friend can be a vendor, can be an alliance partner, could be somebody. Just remember that you're never alone in this situation. By the way, especially if you're a small business, right? If you're hit, most probably there's not 100 companies around you who are hit at the same time, right? But actually realizing that, again, if you keep your head cool and you're dealing with the situation, speak about it, right? And speak about it to trust people around you, because you know what, they'll find a way to help you as well. Third thing, communicate, right? And learn to communicate within the organization, because as a cybersecurity people, we, now say I've dealt with enough, I call them Enrique, I'm sure you've gone through your years as well, right? When I was younger, I'll start with me. I thought I can resolve everything by myself. We're the smartest. We are, most probably the brightest individuals in those teams, right? So learn to communicate, because as you communicate within the organization and you kept your head cool and you got an external advice, likely the solution to some of that might not be cyber solution. You might have alternative business processes. You might have alternative ways to be online. You might just choose to, it's fine if that goes down. Don't try and resolve a cyber incident from pure cyber technology perspective itself, right? It's broad. In the end of the day, you're part of a broader team. You need to be able to explain what's happened. Well, it's not always, I can tell you, it's not always the best thing to go to a board of directors and say, you know what, we've been hacked. How bad is it? Well, we don't know, right? So the initial briefings tend to be very amazing, right? So, but again, as I say, be brave about it, because if you're transparent about it, there's far more people respect you about that, right? If you seek advice, people respect you about that. What is not greatly respected for me is don't pull your head on, don't stick your head in the sand, right? Because to be honest, it's gonna come and bite you. Don't think you're a hero. You never are, right? In those situations. So just embrace it, as I say. And I repeat, keep calm, call a friend, and communicate. Those are my 3 takeaways, really. I know you asked for one, but great. I don't think.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. It's great. It's great to have like a list in that order. And if you're interested, mine would be have a plan, stick to it, but be prepared to improvise within the structure of the plan. That would be mine, right? It's been a fascinating panel. Honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to all 3 of you. Danny, Donna, Anthony, thank you very much for giving up your time to be with us at the event today and to share your knowledge and expertise with the 102 people I can see in the participant list, which is an incredible number. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope one day we get to share war stories in person when all of this is behind us. It would be fantastic. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks.
On that note, I'd like to introduce you now to the people who will be running the workshops later on today, to Ian and to Callie. They're going to come online and I hope, relying on technology again. Yes, I can see at least one of them. They're going to come online and just tell you a little bit about the workshops that they're going to be running this afternoon. Again, highly recommended. I have the utmost respect for these colleagues of mine, and it will be a very, very valuable way for you to spend some of your time this afternoon. Ian, Callie, did you decide who's going first?
Yeah, we do it in order. Hey, Rick, I didn't know we had the shared past and token ring. The workshops tonight, it's like I worked with together with Ian, so there's a flow between them. And we're looking at the perspective, like we're both working with trend, but this is absolutely not a sales presentation. We're not going to show any trend technology or typical technology that you would use. It's rather more about what was mentioned here in the meeting quite often. So it's more about education, what is actually happening, what is going on. So for example, Donna was talking about password sharing. And I also heard Danny about simple passwords. I heard about multi-factor authentication, smart devices. And it's what I'm going to do is disprove a lot of myths and rumors around how password cracking is working. I'm going to demonstrate how attackers would attack into a business, how they move around in there. And because like in many discussions that I have is, so for example, if you're talking about password security and people say, well, I should have a complex password because if you try 4 or 5 times, you'll be locked out anyway. And I'm going to disprove why this is completely irrelevant. I'm also going to disprove ideas of if I put something like a smart device IoT, if I put it out on the internet, no one knows it's there. Those things I'm going to disprove. And like I said, demonstrate how an attacker would move in, move around, as seen from our own global infrastructure services in Trend.
And hopefully you're going to give people a few takeaways of things they can do to avoid that happening to them.
That's when it comes into Ian. So I'll propose a couple of tricks, hints, and what to look out for. But then it's like you can see I'm dressed in red, so I'll be the red team, the attacking team. And if you notice, Ian is wearing blue. He'll be the. Let me share my screen for a picture. I'm good like this. I hope this makes this very descriptive. So basically, I'll be presenting the black hat guy, the guy on the left being the red team, and I'll be attacking. And then Ian is going to discuss how they are, like what they're doing about this. I'll let him talk about it.
All right, that's a perfect segue. Ian, why should people come to your session? What's it all about?
Yeah, so I suppose as attacks have grown in volume, sophistication, and diversity, meaning that there's a greater penetration rate for the attackers, and due to the sophistication, they're kind of more difficult to spot. And this is all fueled by a multi-million-dollar underground economy motivated by fairly significant payoffs. So from the time an attacker gains access to an environment to the time that they've accomplished their objectives, that's where organizations need to promote, focus kind of proactive adversary detection efforts. In other words, defenders need to take a more active approach and look for signs of compromise, not already detected by their existing technology stacks. So this is where threat hunting comes in, and is what we'll be talking about today. We'll break down attacks using a framework known as MITRE ATT&CK, and we'll show some examples of how we can identify attacks in the early stages and defend our turf.
Fantastic. It sounds an incredible session. I look forward to being a part of it, actually. I have another question for you, though, Ian. Are you broadcasting from a shed or a sauna?
It's both. Actually, this is a man cave, so this is my work from home.
Fantastic environment. Love it.
It's not a virtual background.
All right, Callie, Ian, thanks for joining us briefly this morning. Look forward to your sessions this afternoon. I hope that you get an absolutely full house. Audience, whoever you are, I wish I could see all your lovely, smiling, clean, shiny faces, but I can't. Nevertheless, I'm extremely grateful. We're all extremely grateful that you chose to spend so long with us this morning. We hope it's been beneficial, educational, and we hope that you will return for more. Thank you very much indeed.
Excellent. Looking forward. Thank you, Rick.
Thanks, everyone.